In 1842, the terrifying sail of the Nemesis, a British iron steamship, loomed over the Yangtze River, forcing a 4,000-year-old civilization to its knees. It looked like the absolute end of an empire. But fast forward to today, and that same river is now the artery of the world's largest industrial power, its ports flooding Western markets with Chinese goods. Most history books tell you the West defeated China, but they rarely explain how that defeat actually saved China from irrelevance. The century of humiliation was not just a tragedy, it was a necessary trauma, a brutal wake-up call that shattered a decaying feudal relic and forged the hyper-modern titan we see today. The British Empire came looking for tea and silver, but they accidentally woke a dragon that had been sleeping for centuries. To understand the magnitude of the crash, we first have to witness the height. By the late 18th century, the Qing Dynasty wasn't just a powerful nation, it viewed itself as the civilization, the Middle Kingdom, around which the rest of the world merely orbited. It was an empire of unrivaled opulence, controlling the tea, silk, and porcelain that drained silver from European treasuries. The emperor, the son of heaven, looked upon Westerners not as rivals, but as red-faced barbarians from a damp island. When the British arrived in 1793 offering industrial gifts, telescopes, clocks, and weaponry, Emperor Qianlong famously dismissed them with a letter to King George III. "We possess all things. I set no value on objects strange or ingenious." It was the ultimate expression of confidence, but also of fatal blindness. While Europe was forging the Industrial Revolution, China was perfecting its own stagnation, drunk on its own history. They believed their walls were eternal. They were wrong. The collision wasn't a war, it was the violent crashing of two different timelines. When the British Royal Navy arrived, they brought with them the Nemesis, the world's first iron warship. To the Chinese defenders, watching their wooden junks splinter into matchsticks against iron hulls that moved against the wind, these weren't ships. They were monsters. It wasn't a battle. It was an industrial slaughter that rendered centuries of Chinese naval tradition obsolete in an afternoon. But the bombardment was only the finishing move. The true invasion had already happened in the pipehouses of Canton. Facing a massive trade deficit, the British Empire had resorted to the darkest strategy in economic history: state-sponsored narco-trafficking. They flooded China with Indian opium, deliberately addicting millions of civilians just to recover the silver they spent on tea. It was a violation of the highest order, a civilization poisoned for profit, then bombarded for trying to stop it. As the smoke cleared over the Pearl River, the silence left behind was deafening. For the first time in millennia, the Middle Kingdom looked in the mirror and didn't see the ruler of the world. It saw a victim. What followed wasn't just a political defeat, it was the systematic dismantling of a nation's soul. The 1842 Treaty of Nanking was the first cut, forcing China to cede Hong Kong and pay for the very opium that had been used to poison it. But the vultures were only just circling. Soon, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan descended for the slicing of the melon, carving the coastline into foreign spheres of influence where Chinese law no longer applied. The lowest circle of this hell was reached in 1860. British and French troops marched on the old summer palace, the Yuanming Yuan, a wonder of the world filled with centuries of art, architecture, and history. In an act of cultural desecration that still haunts Beijing today, looted it clean and burned it to the ground. The fire raged for 3 days, casting a black pall of smoke over the capital. The psychological trauma was total. The emperor, once revered as the son of heaven, was reduced to a powerless spectator in his own house, forced to watch as foreign merchants and soldiers divided his inheritance. The Middle Kingdom hadn't just been beaten, it had been hollowed out, leaving behind a legacy of shame that would fester for generations. From the smoldering ruins of the Summer Palace, a dangerous realization began to take root. The fall of the Qing Dynasty in 1911 wasn't just the end of a lineage, it was the violent rejection of the past. Amidst the chaos of warlords and revolution, Chinese intellectuals looked at their conquerors and understood the cold equation of survival. Tradition cannot save us. Only power can. The Confucian classics that had guided the empire for millennia were useless against machine guns. China realized that to defeat the foreign devils, it had to become them. They needed to adopt the very industrialism, militarism, and ruthless nationalism that had enslaved them. The desire for harmony was replaced by a hunger for strength. This was the moment the victim mentality died, replaced by a terrifying ambition. The humiliation didn't kill the Chinese spirit, it radicalized it. The irony is staggering. After decades of internal chaos, China finally re-engaged with the world, not to bow, but to absorb. They took the very weapon that had defeated them, industrial capitalism, and mastered it with a vengeance that the West could only envy. They invited foreign companies in, not as saviors, but as tutors, extracting technology and expertise in exchange for cheap labor, biding their time until the student surpassed the master. The result was the fastest accumulation of wealth and power in human history. In a single generation, the mudflats of Shenzhen exploded into neon metropolises, and the quiet countryside was dissected by the blur of high-speed rail. The roar of construction became the new heartbeat of the nation. But make no mistake, this economic miracle wasn't driven merely by a desire for luxury or GDP. It was driven by the searing memory of 1860. Every factory built, every port expanded, and every aircraft carrier launched is a psychological fortification. They built a modern economy as armor, ensuring that the century of humiliation remains a history lesson, never a future reality. The national motto, "Never Again," isn't whispered. It is stamped on every shipping container leaving Shanghai, bound for the very nations that once carved China apart. This history explains the headline news you see today. When Western analysts describe Chinese foreign policy as aggressive or wolf warrior diplomacy, they are missing the point. To Beijing, this isn't aggression. It's a correction. When Western leaders lecture China on trade rules or human rights today, the Chinese leadership doesn't hear advice. They hear the arrogant echoes of British admirals dictating terms from the deck of a gunboat. That historical trauma is the lens through which every modern negotiation is viewed. The difference now is that the gunboats are gone, and the leverage has shifted. The West forced a civilization to modernize at gunpoint to survive, and they succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. The student has surpassed the master, and China is no longer looking for a seat at the table. It is starting to rewrite the rules of the game. The wheel of history has turned. The humiliation is over. The reckoning is here. It serves as a brutal, timeless lesson. Empires are rarely murdered. They commit suicide by creating their own replacements. The West forged its own greatest rival. To understand the other side of this story, watch our video on the decline of the British Empire here.